Lucas Kessler ran a callous thumb over the edge of the carbon fiber panel, checking for imperfections. The garage air hung thick with the scent of paint and polish, the familiar backdrop to his thoughts. At 39, Lucas had built his luxury car customization business from nothing but raw talent and stubborn determination. Now kings of industry and sports, stars waited months for his touch to transform their vehicles. The vibration of his phone against the metal workbench cut through his concentration. He grabbed it with a sigh, expecting another client eager for updates. Instead, his wife's name lit up the screen. The message knocked the air from his lungs. "You're not coming to my sister's wedding. My family doesn't want you there." Lucas stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the words at first. He read it again, then a third time. Each word hammered into him like a physical blow. Not with pain, but with a slow-burning rage that started deep in his gut. 3 years of marriage. 6 years together. And this was how little he meant. His thumbs hovered over the screen. A dozen responses formed and died in his mind. Finally, he typed 6 words with deliberate precision. "So you chose status over blood?" He set the phone down and turned back to his work, but his hands trembled slightly. The carbon fiber panel suddenly seemed meaningless. He pushed away from the workbench and walked to his office in the back of the garage. Inside, Lucas unlocked his desk drawer and pulled out a leather folder. He opened it methodically, revealing a stack of paperwork, receipts, contracts, confirmation emails. All for his sister-in-law Laurel's wedding that he'd personally arranged and funded the vineyard venue overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. He'd paid the deposit on the catering, the balance due in 1 week. He'd ordered a rare wine shipment from collector in France, a wedding gift that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Lucas picked up his phone and made 3 calls to the venue. "I need to cancel a booking." "Yes, I understand the cancellation policy. Charge whatever fees apply." To the caterer, "I won't be proceeding with the event next month." "Yes, I understand I'll lose my deposit." To the wine merchant, "I need to cancel my order immediately. Redirect it to my business address instead." When he finished, Lucas sat back in his chair, a cold satisfaction settling over him. He'd just erased $47,000 worth of wedding contributions with 3 phone calls. The fallout would be nuclear, but as far as he was concerned, he'd simply snipped the strings they'd been yanking for years. His phone buzzed with incoming calls. Aspen, repeatedly. He switched it to silent and placed it face down on the desk. "You drew first blood?" he murmured to the empty office. Lucas could still remember the first time he saw Aspen. 5 years earlier, a university fundraiser he'd attended only because a client had given him tickets. She'd stood apart from the crowd, her dark hair falling in soft waves around a face that caught the light just right. But it wasn't her beauty that had hooked him, it was the animated way she'd explained sociological theories to a small group gathered around her. Her intelligence burned bright, pulling him into her orbit. "You look like you're plotting an escape," she'd said when she caught him watching from the edge of the room. "I was calculating how many of these tiny sandwiches it would take to make a real meal," he'd answered, making her laugh. They were opposites in every way that should have mattered. Aspen came from a family with old Southern money and older Southern pretensions. Her father, though deceased, had been a federal judge. Her mother, Regina, carried herself like aristocracy. Her younger sister, Laurel, had embraced the role of golden child, collecting degrees and accolades with practiced ease. By contrast, Lucas had grown up with a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner. He'd skipped college to apprentice at an auto shop, living in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a dream of something more. By 30, he'd built that dream in a Charlotte's premier luxury vehicle customization shop. By 35, celebrities and CEOs were flying in just to consult with him. In the beginning, Aspen had seemed to admire his self-made success. "You built something real," she told him once. "Most of the men I know just inherited their father's name and money." The wedding had been smaller than her family wanted, a compromise Aspen had fought for, standing up to Regina's insistence on a society event. Back then, Lucas had believed it was for him. Now he wondered if she'd just been asserting independence in the safest way possible. The cracks had formed slowly. Dinners with her family where conversations deliberately excluded him. subtle comments about his trade rather than profession. The way Regina's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at him. And Aspen, his brilliant, beautiful wife, would say nothing. Not during, not after. She'd squeeze his hand under the table, as if that made up for her silence. "They need time," she'd say when they were alone. "You're different for what they expected from me." Different, Lucas would repeat, the word hollowing out each time that he remembered their third Christmas together. Regina had given him work gloves while everyone else received thoughtful, expensive gifts. "For your hobby," she'd said with a thin smile. Aspen had laughed it off later. "Mom's just old-fashioned." But Lucas had seen what she couldn't admit, that she was caught between worlds, unwilling to fully commit to either. She taught sociology with passionate lectures on class inequality, then came home and ignored it in her own living room. The signs had been there. He'd just chosen not to read them. The moment Lucas truly understood what his marriage had become happened exactly 37 days before Laurel's wedding. Regina had hosted a casual family brunch at her sprawling colonial revival home in Myers Park, Charlotte's old money neighborhood. The house practically groaned under the weight of its pedigree antique furniture, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, silver that had survived the Civil War. Lucas had worn a clean button-down shirt and his best jeans. Aspen had given him a once-over before they left their house, her brow furrowing slightly. "What?" he'd asked. "Nothing," she'd answered too quickly. The brunch unfolded with practiced politeness. Regina presided over the table like a general, directing the conversation with subtle nudges and calculated questions. "Aspen's department is being considered for a special university endowment," Regina announced, beaming at her daughter. "The dean says she's become one of their most valuable assets." Lucas had reached for Aspen's hand under the table. "That's amazing, babe. You didn't tell me." Aspen had shifted slightly, moving her hand to reach for water. "It's not confirmed yet. Confirmation is just a formality," Laurel had chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "With the Richardson family backing your department, it's practically guaranteed." Lucas had noticed the look between mother and daughters. "The Richardsons?" Regina's smile tightened. "Old family friends. Their son is on the board of trustees." "James Richardson," Laurel added. "You remember him, right, Aspen? The one who took you to that fundraiser last month when Lucas was too busy." The silence that followed was brief but deafening. "Work trip," Lucas supplied, his voice carefully neutral. "Custom job in California." He looked at his wife. "I didn't realize you'd gone with someone else." "It wasn't like that," Aspen said quickly. "Just colleagues." "Of course it wasn't," Regina assured with a patronizing pat on Lucas's arm. "Academic circles require certain appearances. Aspen understands the game." The conversation had moved on, but something had shifted. Lucas felt it like a gear slipping out of place, the smooth mechanism of his marriage suddenly grinding. Later, as they helped clear the dishes, Laurel cornered him in the kitchen. "My wedding's going to be perfect," she declared, arranging dessert plates with unnecessary precision. "I've dreamed about this since I was a little girl." "I'm sure it will be," Lucas replied, detecting the trajectory of her words. "I know you're handling a lot of the arrangements," she continued, her voice dropping. "Aspen says you insisted." Lucas kept his expression neutral. "Just trying to help." Laurel leaned closer, lowering her voice to a mock conspiratorial whisper. "Just remember, some people aren't wedding material, you know?" She followed this with a laugh that dripped with false warmth. "No offense." He'd watched her walk away, the expensive fabric of her dress rustling. Across the room, Aspen caught his eye, saw his expression, and quickly looked away. That was the moment. The precise second when Lucas understood that loyalty was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. The drive home had been silent until they pulled into their driveway. "Your sister has a way with words," he'd said finally. Aspen had sighed. "She's just nervous about the wedding." "That's what that was." "Nerve?" "Lucas, please. You know how she is. Don't take it personally." He'd turn to look at his wife, really look at her. "But it is personal. That's the point. And you know it." She'd gotten out of the car without answering, the door closing with a decisive click that echoed in his chest. That night, lying beside his sleeping wife, Lucas had made a mental list of every contribution he'd made to Laurel's wedding. Every dollar he'd spent to impress a family that would never accept him. Every compromise he'd made to keep the peace. He'd turned the numbers over in his mind until dawn broke through the blinds. By then, the list had become something else entirely, an insurance policy. Lucas spent the day after Aspen's text messages workshop, phone still on silent, immersed in the reassuring precision of his work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency over a vintage Ferrari dashboard, but his mind raced through calculations and contingencies. When he finally checked his phone at sundown, there were 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Some from Aspen, many from Regina, even a few from Laurel. He read them all without expression, then set the phone down again. They hadn't expected consequences. That was clear from the panic in their messages. They'd assumed he would accept the insult, perhaps sulk, but ultimately continue funding the celebration he wasn't welcome to attend. Lucas drove home well after midnight, half expecting to find Aspen waiting up. Instead, he found a note on the kitchen counter, "Staying at Mom's tonight. We need to talk. Call me when you're ready." He crumpled the note and tossed in the trash. Then he went to his home office, unlocked the wall safe, and removed a thumb drive. Plugging it into his computer, he began systematically organizing digital copies of every receipt, every contract, every email related to Laurel's wedding. Next, he opened his financial software and documented every transaction. The venue deposit, $15,000. The final catering payment due, $22,000. The wine shipment, $10,000. The band he'd personally booked through a client connection, $5,000. The photographer, the flowers, the custom invitations he'd had designed by an artist friend. All told, he contributed over $60,000 to his sister-in-law's wedding, nearly 2/3 of the total budget. All done quietly, with minimal acknowledgement from Aspen's family, who'd acted as though these arrangements had magically materialized through their own importance. Lucas drafted emails to each vendor, formally canceling his financial commitments. To the venue, he wrote, "I regret to inform you that I am withdrawing my financial support for the Mackenzie Palmer wedding scheduled for June 18th. As a contractual party who placed a deposit, I request immediate confirmation of this cancellation. Any further arrangements must be made directly with the wedding party." That he repeated this process methodically for each vendor, keeping his language professional and direct. He was careful not to cancel the actual bookings, just his involvement in them. Let them scramble to replace the funds if they could not be wide dawn. Lucas had dismantled every financial commitment he'd made. He sent the emails without hesitation, then went to shower and change. His phone rang as he was making coffee. Regina's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Then, curious about the fallout, he answered. "Lucas." Regina's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "What do you think you're doing?" "Good morning, Regina," he replied calmly. "I assume you've heard from the venue. They say the deposit has been withdrawn, that everything is canceled unless we pay immediately. What is this? Some childish tantrum?" Lucas took a sip of his coffee. "Not at all. I'm simply removing myself from the equation, as requested. As rec." She stopped, her breath audible through the phone. "This is about Aspen's message. Lucas, be reasonable. It was a misunderstanding." "Was it?" He kept his voice even. "Seemed pretty clear to me. Laurel was concerned about tensions. She just wanted her day to be perfect. Surely you understand." "I do understand," Lucas agreed. "Perfectly. That's why I'm respecting her wishes. If I'm not welcome at the wedding, my money shouldn't be either." "You can't do this," Regina hissed. "The venue is booked. People are coming. Arrangements have been made." "Yes, they have. By me. And now they're unmade. By me. This is unacceptable. I'm calling our lawyer." Lucas laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Go ahead. I kept all the receipts. Every contract has my name on it. I never signed anything over to Laurel or you." He paused. "You should have been nicer to the guy who writes the checks, Regina." He ended the call and blocked her number. Then he texted Aspen, "I'll be at the shop all day if you want to talk. Come alone." Less than an hour later, Another set of dominoes began to fall that Aspen's department chair received an anonymous email with screenshots from the McKinsey family group chat messages where Aspen had made derogatory remarks about her students' backgrounds. Comments about scholarship kids and their limited worldviews. Observations about how certain students clearly didn't come from homes where education was valued. The center had taken care to include messages where Aspen specifically named students, violating university privacy policies. WY noon, the university's ethics committee had opened an internal review. Aspen burst into Lucas's workshop just after 3 p.m., her face flushed with anger and panic. She found him bent over a custom steering wheel, meticulously wrapping it in hand-stitched leather. "Did you do this?" she demanded without preamble. "Did you send those screenshots to my department?" Lucas set down his tools carefully, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He studied his wife's face, the familiar features now contorted with rage. Something cold settled in his chest. "Hello to you too," he said. "Don't play games with me, Lucas. They're talking about an ethics violation. My career is on the line." He gestured to a stool. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want answers. And I want a wife who doesn't let her family treat me like dirt," he replied, his voice flat. "Looks like we're both disappointed." Aspen ran her hands through her hair, disheveling the careful styling. "Is that what this is about? You're punishing me because of what Laurel said? You're that petty." "Petty?" Lucas stood up slowly. "Your sister disinvited me from her wedding. A wedding I paid for. And you went along with it." "I didn't." "Yes, you did. You texted me. All caps, if I remember correctly. I was just passing along what they decided." Lucas laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet workshop. "That's worse, Aspen. You're my wife. You're supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side," she insisted, stepping closer. "But you have to understand," Laurel was worried about. "About what? That I'd embarrass her? Show up in grease-stained jeans? Talk about carburetors with her fancy friends?" He shook his head. "After all these years, your family still thinks I'm some kind of charity case you picked up. That's not true." "It is true. And you know what the real problem is? You think so too." He held up a hand when she tried to protest. "Maybe not consciously, but it's there. Every time you apologize for me, every time you explain my job to your colleagues like you're translating from another language." Aspen's face crumpled slightly. "Lucas, please. This has gone too far. The wedding venue is threatening to book another event. The caterer wants payment by tomorrow, or they're canceling. My mother is beside herself. Not my problem anymore." "How can you say that? We're family, are we?" Lucas asked quietly. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm just the bank. And now the bank is closed." Aspen took a breath, visibly trying to calm herself. Her tone shifted, becoming softer, more reasonable. "Look, I understand you're hurt. But this reaction, canceling everything, sending those screenshots to my department, it's excessive. I never said I sent anything to your department." "Then who did?" "Those were private family messages." Lucas shrugged. "Maybe someone in your family has a conscience after all." Aspen stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "It was you. I know it was. Believe what you want. Lucas, this has to stop. You made your point. Now fix it. Call the venue back. Reinstate the deposits." "No, no. Just like that. Just like that." He turned back to the steering wheel. "You drew first blood, Aspen. Not me." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "What does that even mean? This isn't some kind of war, isn't it?" He removed her hand gently but firmly. "Your family has been at war with me since day one. The difference is now I'm fighting back. By destroying my sister's wedding, by threatening my career, actions have consequences." Aspen stepped back, her expression hardening. "I never thought you could be this cruel, and I never thought you'd choose your family's approval over your marriage. Looks like we were both wrong. This isn't just about the wedding, is it? This is about everything. You've been keeping score all this time." Lucas shook his head. "No, Aspen. I've been hoping things would change. That eventually your family would see me as good enough. That you would stand up for me. I stopped keeping score a long time ago because the numbers just got too depressing." "So what now?" she asked, her voice smaller. "What's your endgame here?" Lucas met her gaze steadily. "I haven't decided yet." "You're overreacting," she said, but the words lacked conviction. You can't throw away our marriage over one text. It wasn't just one text. It was years of small cuts. This was just the one that finally hit an artery. Aspen looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. Fix this, Lucas, before it can't be fixed. It's already broken, he said to her, retreating back. You just didn't notice until it affected you. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the workshop. The following morning, Lucas drove to a different part of Charlotte, away from the manicured lawns of Myers Park to the revitalized industrial district where brick warehouses had been transformed into creative spaces. He parked his custom black Challenger outside a converted textile factory with a simple sign, Hall Pass Media. Inside, the space hummed with activity. Young people with headphones and laptops occupied various stations in the open-concept studio. A woman at the front desk looked up as Lucas entered. Can I help you? I'm here to see Maddox, Lucas said. Tell him it's Lucas Kessler. Her eyes widened slightly with recognition. Oh, you're the car guy. Maddox talks about you all the time. Before she could say more, a booming voice called out from across the room. Lucas Kessler, as I live and breathe. Maddox Hall emerged from a glass-walled recording booth, arms outstretched. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a beard that couldn't quite hide the scar along his jaw, Maddox moved through the space with the easy confidence of someone who owned not just the room, but the building. The two men embraced, slapping each other's backs with genuine affection. How long has it been? Maddox asked, holding Lucas at arm's length to inspect him. Bobby Mitchell's wedding. 2 years ago. Too damn long, Maddox declared. Come on back. We just wrapped a session. Lucas followed him through the studio to a comfortable office overlooking the city. The walls were covered with framed podcast charts and music memorabilia, remnants of Maddox's first career as a music producer before he'd built one of the Southeast's most popular podcast networks. Maddox closed the door and pointed Lucas to a leather couch. So, not a social call, I'm guessing. Lucas raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Because you look like you did that time in 10th grade right before you put Jimmy Carlson's head through his locker for calling your mom a waitress. A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. You remember that? Hard to forget your skinny ass getting suspended for a week. Then your mom made you work at the diner to see how honest people make a living. Maddox leaned back in his chair. So what's got you looking like you're about to commit homicide? Lucas told him everything: the text from Aspen, the canceled wedding arrangements, the screenshots sent to the university. Maddox listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. When Lucas finished, Maddox whistled low. That's cold, brother. But I can't say I'm surprised about her family. Remember when you first started dating Aspen? I told you those people would never see past their own reflections. Yeah, well, maybe I should have listened. So what's the plan now? Besides financial warfare? Lucas ran a hand over his face. I don't know. Part of me wants to just walk away, file for divorce, and be done with it. And the other part wants to make sure they understand exactly what they lost. Lucas met his friend's gaze. They treated me like I was nothing, Maddox. Like I should be grateful to breathe the same air. Maddox nodded slowly. I get it. More than most. He gestured to the wall of accolades. You think the fancy record executives who wouldn't give me the time of day 20 years ago remember snubbing me now? Success is the best revenge. This isn't about success. I've already got that. No, Maddox agreed. This is about respect. And sometimes people need to learn the hard way. He swiveled in his chair, thinking. Then a slow smile spread across his face. You know, I've been wanting to do a special episode on class barriers in the South. The way old money keeps their circles closed. How self-made people get treated like they're still not one of us. Lucas raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I interview a successful businessman who was pushed out of his wife's family because he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. No names, just the story. Aspen would know immediately. That's the point, Maddox said. The story speaks for itself. Local man funds wedding he's not invited to. People will eat that up. And the best part? It's all true. Lucas considered this, rolling the idea around in his mind. Would it make a difference? Maybe not to them. But sometimes it's not about changing their minds. It's about controlling the narrative. Maddox leaned forward. Right now, they're probably telling everyone you're having some kind of breakdown, that you're being unreasonable. Let's flip the script. Lucas thought about Regina's barely disguised contempt, Laurel's mocking words in the kitchen, Aspen's silence when it mattered most. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. 3 days later, the episode went live. Maddox kept his promise, no names were mentioned. But the details were specific enough that anyone who knew the situation would recognize it immediately. Lucas, identified only as a successful small business owner in Charlotte, calmly described his experiences. How he'd built his company from nothing. How he'd fallen in love with a woman from a wealthy family. How, over time, he'd realized that no matter what he achieved, he would always be seen as inferior. The final straw, he explained, was being told he wasn't welcome at a family event he had largely financed. At what point do you stop trying to earn acceptance from people who have already decided you don't deserve it? Lucas asked during the interview. The episode went viral within hours. Local news picked it up. Social media buzzed with speculation about the family's identity. Comment sections filled with similar stories from listeners who'd experienced class prejudice in their own relationships. Aspen called him that evening, her voice tight with controlled fury. "How could you?" she demanded when Lucas answered. "Everyone knows it's us." "I didn't name anyone," Lucas replied calmly. "And I only told the truth. My colleagues are asking questions. My friends are texting me. Even students are talking about it. Then maybe they'll think twice before treating someone like they're not good enough. You're destroying our life." Aspen cried. "Over what?" "Pride." Lucas took a deep breath. "No, Aspen. Not pride. Self-respect. There's a difference. My mother wants to sue Maddox for defamation." Lucas laughed. "Good luck with that. Truth is an absolute defense. Besides, no one was named. This has to stop," Aspen pleaded, her tone shifting from anger to desperation. "Please, Lucas. We can work this out. Come home. We'll talk face to face." "I am home," he said quietly, "and I don't think there's anything left to say." After hanging up, Lucas sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by the half-finished projects that had once been his only focus. Now they seemed like artifacts from another life, one where he believed love could bridge any gap. His phone buzzed with a text from Maddox. "People are calling him like crazy. You struck a nerve, brother. You're not alone in this." Lucas didn't reply, but something eased in his chest. For the first time since Aspen's text, he felt the cold knot of anger loosen, replaced by something quieter and more resolute that he wasn't broken. He was merely seeing clearly at last. The collapse of Laurel Mackenzie's perfect wedding happened faster than Lucas could have predicted. With just 2 weeks before the scheduled date, vendors began pulling out one by one. Without Lucas's deposits and final payments, the financial burden fell entirely on the Mackenzie family. Regina scrambled to cover the gaps, depleting accounts she'd earmarked for other purposes. The exclusive vineyard venue gave them 48 hours to replace the full payment or forfeit the date entirely. The caterer refused to order supplies without money up front. The rare wines Lucas had arranged remained in France. Through industry connections, Lucas heard snippets of the unfolding chaos. Regina had apparently shown up at the venue in person, attempting to leverage her social standing to secure more time. The manager, a recent transplant from California, had been unmoved by her family name or her threats. "I understand your situation, Mrs. Mackenzie," he'd reportedly said, "but business is business. We have another party interested in the date who can pay immediately." Laurel's fiancé, Bryce Palmer, had begun asking uncomfortable questions. A successful architect from Atlanta with no patience for Southern aristocratic games, he'd been under the impression that Laurel's family was covering the wedding costs. Learning that Lucas, the brother-in-law, now conspicuously absent from the guest list, had been bankrolling much of it raised red flags. Lucas was working late at the shop, finishing a rush job on a Bentley, when his phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. When he did, Bryce's voice came through the speaker. "Lucas? It's Bryce, Laurel's fiancé. I got your number from your shop's website." Lucas set down his tools. "Bryce, this is unexpected." "Yeah, well, I need to talk to you. Not over the phone." A pause. "It's important." They agreed to meet at a bar downtown neutral territory far from both the Mackenzie home and Lucas's usual haunts. Lucas arrived first, claiming a booth in the back where they wouldn't be easily overheard. He ordered a whiskey and waited, wondering what Bryce could possibly want. They'd met only a handful of times, always in the carefully orchestrated setting of family gatherings where Bryce, like Lucas, had largely played the role of polite observer. Bryce arrived precisely on time, his usual tailored appearance slightly rumpled. He slid into the booth across from Lucas with a nod. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, ordering a beer when the waitress came by. "No problem," Lucas replied. "What's on your mind?" Bryce took a long drink from his beer when it arrived, then set it down decisively. "I need to know what's really going on. One day, everything's fine. The next, the wedding's falling apart, Regina's having meltdowns, and Laurel won't give me a straight answer." Lucas studied him for a moment. "What has Laurel told you? That you're having some kind of breakdown? That you pulled your financial support out of spite?" Bryce held up a hand. "But that doesn't track with what I know about you. And it doesn't explain why you were paying for so much in the first place." "Did you ask Laurel about that part?" "I tried. She said you insisted on contributing. That was your idea." Bryce's expression hardened. "But then I heard Regina on the phone with the venue, saying you'd funded most of the wedding to show off how successful you'd become." Lucas laughed without humor. "Yeah, that sounds like Regina. So what's the truth?" Lucas considered his options. He could tell Bryce everything how the Mackenzie family had treated him, how Aspen had betrayed him, how he'd been explicitly uninvited from the wedding. Or he could stay vague, let Bryce draw his own conclusions that, in the end, he decided on honesty. Bryce deserved that much. "The truth is, I was told I wasn't welcome at the wedding. By text message, no less." Bryce's brow furrowed. "Who told you that?" "Aspen. But the message was clear it came from Laurel and Regina. And that's why you pulled the funding." Lucas nodded. "Would you continue paying for an event you were banned from attending?" Bryce was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. "No," he said finally. "I wouldn't. Look, I don't know what Laurel has told you about me, or about her family's feelings toward me, but I've spent 3 years trying to earn their acceptance. Nothing was ever enough. I'm starting to see that." Bryce murmured, almost to himself. Then, looking up at Lucas, "There's something else. Something I found when I was looking through the wedding budget Laurel finally showed me." "What's that?" "The venue cost. It's listed as $15,000 for deposit, $10,000 balance." Bryce leaned forward. "But I called them directly. The actual cost is $15,000 total. Where's the other $10,000 going?" Lucas felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "Are there other discrepancies?" "Several. The caterer is inflated by $7,000. The flowers by $5,000. Bryce's jaw tightened. "That's at least $22,000 unaccounted for. Let me guess. The money was being funneled to Regina." Bryce's silence was confirmation enough. "She's been using my contributions to pay off her debts," Lucas said, the pieces falling into place. "That's why she was so desperate when I pulled my funding. I confronted Laurel about it yesterday," Bryce said quietly. "She didn't deny it. Just said her mother needed help, and it wasn't a big deal because you could afford it." Lucas felt a surge of vindication mixed with disgust. "And what did you say to that?" "I said I needed time to think." Bryce finished his beer in one long swallow. "I've been thinking for 24 hours straight, and I've reached a conclusion, which is, I can't marry into this." Bryce's voice was firm despite the pain evident in his eyes. "I love Laurel, but this using people, lying about money, it's not what I signed up for." Lucas nodded slowly. "I understand. Better to know now than later. I'm ending it tonight." Bryce stood, placing money on the table for his drink. "I wanted to hear your side first. Thank you for being straight with me." "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," Lucas said, and meant it. "You seem like a good guy." Bryce gave a sad smile. "Yeah, well, sometimes that's not enough, is it?" After Bryce left, Lucas remained at the booth, nursing his whiskey. He felt no pleasure in the confirmation that Regina had been essentially embezzling from her daughter's wedding fund. No satisfaction in knowing that Laurel was about to lose her fiancé. Just a hollow certainty that he'd been right to protect himself from a family that saw nothing wrong with using people. His phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Bryce again. It's done. Thought you should know. Take care of yourself. Lucas sent back a simple reply. You 2.2 nights later, the final scene in Laurel's implosion played out at Regina's house. Lucas heard about it afterward from the catering manager, a woman who'd worked with him on several client events and had no love for the McKenzie family's demands. Laurel had spiraled after Bryce left. The wedding was effectively canceled, no venue, no catering, no fiancé. At a family dinner meant to strategize next steps, she'd finally snapped. This is all your fault, she'd reportedly screamed at Aspen. If you'd controlled your husband, none of this would have happened. My fault, Aspen had shot back. You're the one who insisted he couldn't come. You and Mom, only because you kept complaining about how embarrassed you were by him. Laurel had retorted. How he didn't fit in, how your colleagues looked down on you for marrying him. I never said that. Yes, you did. In this very room. Last Christmas. Regina had tried to intervene. Girls, please. This isn't helping. Stay out of it, Mother, Laurel had snapped. You're the worst of all. Taking Lucas's money and redirecting it to pay off your credit cards? Did you think no one would notice? Don't speak to me that way, Regina had hissed. Everything I've done has been for this family. No, it's been for you. It's always been for you. Your reputation, your social standing, your precious family name. Laurel's voice had risen hysterically. And now I have nothing. Bryce is gone. The wedding is ruined. All because you both treated Lucas like dirt. That was when Regina had slapped her. The sound had echoed through the dining room, leaving stunned silence in its wake. Aspen had stood up, looking between her mother and sister. You're both toxic, she'd said quietly. And Lucas was right to walk away. Then she'd left, the door slamming behind her. Lucas listened to this account with detached interest, as if hearing about strangers rather than his own family. The catering manager had related with a certain glee service industry revenge for the McKenzies' habitually poor treatment. Sounds like quite a night, Lucas had commented mildly. They deserve each other, the manager had replied. But for what it's worth, I think your wife finally sees it too. Lucas wasn't so sure. Aspen had spent years navigating between worlds. One family dinner gone wrong wouldn't change that. But it might be the first crack in the foundation of her carefully constructed life, and those cracks had a way of spreading that it was well past midnight when Lucas heard the familiar sound of Aspen's car pulling into the workshop parking lot. He'd been working late, losing himself in the meticulous process of restoring a 1967 Corvette Stingray, a personal project he'd started years ago and had recently returned to with renewed focus. He didn't stop working when the side door opened. Didn't look up when her footsteps approached, the sound of her expensive heels unmistakable against the concrete floor. Lucas. Her voice was smaller than he'd ever heard it. When he finally looked up, he barely recognized the woman standing before him. Aspen's usual polished appearance had crumbled. Her hair hung limp around her face. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She wore no makeup, and the cashmere sweater that usually fit her perfectly looked somehow wrong, as if she'd lost weight in just the few days since he'd seen her last. It's late, he said, turning back to the Corvette's engine. I know. I'm sorry. She took a step closer. Can we talk? Please. Lucas set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a shop rag. I'm listening. Aspen glanced around, seeming lost in the familiar space. Everything's falling apart, she said finally. Laurel and Mom aren't speaking. The wedding's canceled. The university review is proceeding to a formal hearing. I heard about the wedding, Lucas acknowledged. Bryce deserves better. Don't you think I know that? Aspen wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't know, Lucas. About my mother using your money. About Laurel saying those things about you. I swear I didn't. Lucas studied her, looking for the tells he'd learned to recognize over the years, the slight tightening around her eyes when she was lying, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when uncomfortable with the truth. Maybe you didn't know the specifics, he conceded, but you knew who they were, who they've always been. They're my family. Her voice cracked on the word. I was caught in the middle. No, Aspen. You chose a side. Every time you stayed silent. Every time you made excuses for them. Lucas leaned against the workbench. And now you're here because everything's falling apart. Not because you realized you were wrong. That's not fair, isn't it? Would you be here if Bryce hadn't left? If the wedding was still on? If your career wasn't in jeopardy? Aspen flinched. I made mistakes. I'm trying to apologize. Are you? Because it sounds like you're looking for someone to fix your problems. That's not. She stopped, took a breath. Okay, you're right. I didn't stand up for you. I let them treat you badly. And I'm sorry, Lucas. Truly sorry. For a moment, her words hung in the air between them. Lucas wanted to believe her, wanted to see genuine remorse in her eyes, rather than just fear of losing everything she'd built. It's too late, he said quietly. Don't say that. She moved closer, reaching for his hand. We can work through this. Start over. Lucas stepped back, avoiding her touch. There's no starting over, Aspen. The trust is gone. People rebuild trust all the time. Not this kind of trust. Not when someone shows you exactly who they are. Tears filled her eyes. So that's it? Years together, just over. It was over the moment you sent that text. Lucas met her gaze directly. Maybe even before that. Aspen wiped at her eyes angrily. What do you want from me? To grovel? To beg? Will that make you feel better? Nothing you can do will make this better. That's what you're not understanding. So you're punishing me. Punishing all of us. Lucas shook his head. This isn't punishment, Aspen. It's consequences. There's a difference. Lucas, please. I love you. Do you? He studied her face. Or do you love the idea of me? The self-made success story you could show off to your academic friends while still keeping one foot in your mother's world. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Something your family never had to learn. Lucas turned back to the Corvette. I need to finish this. Aspen stood there, tears streaming down her face. What happens now? Now you leave. Tomorrow I call a lawyer. Just like that. Just like that. Lucas picked up his wrench again. You're a polished mirror of your mother, Aspen. You reflect what pleases others, but you've got no light of your own. She stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The sound of her heels against the concrete faded, followed by the closing of the door and the starting of her car. Lucas continued working on the Corvette until dawn broke through the workshop windows. Each part he cleaned and restored felt like a piece of himself being reclaimed, slowly rebuilding what had been broken point 3 days after Aspen's late-night visit. Lucas sat across from Walter Dawson, his attorney of 10 years. Walter's office overlooked downtown Charlotte, the walls lined with law books and framed diplomas that established his credentials without being ostentatious. So you're really doing this, Walter said, reviewing the divorce paperwork Lucas had requested. I can't say I'm surprised, given what you've told me. But I am sorry. Don't be, Lucas replied. It's been a long time coming. Walter nodded, making notes on a legal pad. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. That doesn't mean equal, it means fair, according to the court. Given the short duration of the marriage and the fact that you've kept most of your business assets separate, we should be able to protect the majority of your interests. What about the shop? The building? Walter frowned, checking his notes. That's where things get complicated. You purchased the commercial property 2 years ago, correct? During the marriage? Yes, through the trust we set up, right? The Kessler Asset Trust. Walter sighed. Unfortunately, Aspen is listed as a beneficial party on that trust. It was set up as a joint asset. Lucas leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means she could claim partial ownership of the property in a divorce settlement. Given its value, you said it was recently appraised at $2.4 million? That's a significant asset. Can we remove her from the trust? Walter shook his head. Not without her consent, and I wouldn't advise trying. Any moves that look like you're hiding assets before filing for divorce will be viewed unfavorably by the court. Lucas tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair, thinking, what about transferring the property? To whom? To a charity. Specifically, the Technical Scholarship Foundation we established under my business. Walter considered this. The Kessler Future Mechanics Fund? It's a legitimate 501c3, so theoretically possible. But it would still look suspicious if done right before filing. What if it's not a new decision? Lucas reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. What if it was planned months ago for tax purposes? Walter's eyebrows rose as he accepted the folder and examined its contents. These are transfer documents dated 6 months ago. Yes, signed but not executed. Part of my year-end tax planning with my accountant. Lucas met Walter's questioning gaze steadily. We discussed making this donation eventually. The paperwork was prepared, but never filed. And you want to file it now. I want to execute a plan that was already in motion. The timing is convenient. Walter leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Lucas, I've known you for a decade. You've always been 3 steps ahead when it comes to protecting what's yours. He tapped the folder. This is legal if backdated. Not recommended, but legal. I'm not asking you to backdate anything. The paperwork was genuinely prepared months ago and never filed. Sometimes decisions take time to finalize. Walter nodded slowly. I'll need to consult with the firm's ethics committee. But if the paperwork is legitimate, signed when dated, notarized properly, then the transfer itself is above board. That's all I'm asking. What about your workshop? You're still operating out of that building. I'll lease the space back from the foundation at market rate. Everything transparent and documented. Walter made more notes. Clever. The foundation gets a reliable tenant. You keep your workspace, and the asset moves out of the marital estate. He looked up at Lucas. You really thought this through. I learned a long time ago to prepare for storms before the sky turns dark. Indeed, Walter gathered the papers. I'll review these and call you tomorrow. If everything checks out, we can move forward with both the property transfer and the divorce filing. As Lucas left the attorney's office, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He'd established the Technical Scholarship Foundation 2 years earlier, genuinely wanting to help kids like himself who had talent but no formal education path. The idea of transferring the building had been real something he'd considered for eventual tax benefits. The fact that it now served to protect his most valuable asset from Aspen's claim was, as he'd told Walter, convenient timing that he drove back to his workshop, mind racing through next steps. The transfer would need to be completed before he filed for divorce. Once done, his business would be secure. The timing was tight, but manageable. His phone rang as he pulled into the parking lot. Maddox's name flashed on the screen. Hey, Lucas answered, killing the engine. Just checking in, brother. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Been busy, meeting with lawyers, sorting things out. So you're going through with it? The divorce? Yes, Lucas confirmed. It's time. Maddox was quiet for a moment. How are you holding up? Better than expected. It feels like clarity. Like I finally stopped trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. That's called self-respect. It's a good look on you. Maddox paused. Listen, I'm hosting an event at the old Vineyard venue next Saturday. The one that was supposed to be Laurel's wedding. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You booked it? Hell yes, I did. The manager called me directly after the Mackenzies bailed. Said he followed my podcast and thought I might be interested. Maddox laughed. I'm calling it an Independence Bash. For the podcast's 5th anniversary. Subtle, Lucas commented dryly. About as subtle as a sledgehammer. You should come. I don't know, Maddox. Yes, you do. You've been hiding your workshop too long. Time to remind Charlotte that Lucas Kessler doesn't just survive, he thrives. Lucas considered the invitation. Part of him wanted to avoid anything connected to the wedding that never was. But another part, the part that had been quietly rebuilding his sense of self, recognized the opportunity for what it was. All right, he agreed finally. I'll be there. Excellent. We're something sharp. This is your comeback tour, my friend. After hanging up, Lucas sat in his car for a long moment, watching the afternoon sun glint off the workshop windows. Inside were the tools and projects that had sustained him when everything else fell apart. The business he'd built with his own hands, his own vision. Soon it would be his again. Completely, irrevocably his. And no one, not Aspen, not Regina, not anyone would ever be able to take it from him. The county courthouse hummed with subdued activity as Lucas and Walter made their way to Courtroom C for the preliminary divorce hearing. It had been 3 weeks since their initial meeting, 3 weeks of careful legal maneuvering, paperwork filing, and strategic planning. The property transfer had gone through without a hitch. The Kessler Future Mechanics Fund now officially owned the building housing Lucas's workshop. His business signed a 10-year lease at market rate, with the rental income funding scholarships for students entering technical trades. Walter had called it elegantly bulletproof when the final documents were signed. Now they were facing the first confrontation with Aspen and her attorney, a preliminary hearing to establish temporary arrangements while the divorce proceeded. They found Aspen already seated at the respondent's table, a tall, silver-haired woman in an expensive suit beside her. Lucas recognized Patricia Holden, one of Charlotte's most aggressive divorce attorneys, known for securing substantial settlements for wives of wealthy businessmen. "Looks like she's going for the jugular," Walter murmured as they took their seats. Lucas nodded slightly, but said nothing. His gaze met Aspen's briefly across the room. She looked composed and confident, her professional armor back in place. No trace remained of the desperate woman who had appeared in his workshop that night. The judge entered, and the hearing began with standard procedures establishing identities. Confirming paperwork had been properly filed, outlining the purpose of the preliminary hearing. "Ms. Holden, I understand you have some initial concerns to address," the judge said, turning to Aspen's attorney. Patricia Holden rose smoothly. "Yes, Your Honor. We have serious concerns about Mr. Kessler's handling of marital assets prior to filing. Specifically, the transfer of a commercial property valued at $2.4 million to a charitable foundation under his control." "Mr. Dawson?" the judge inquired, looking toward Walter. Walter stood. "Your Honor, the transfer in question was planned months before any divorce proceedings were contemplated. We have documentation showing the decision was part of Mr. Kessler's tax planning strategy, approved by his accountant, and with paperwork prepared well in advance of recent events. The timing is suspiciously convenient," Holden countered. "Just days before filing for divorce, Mr. Kessler transfers the single largest marital asset to a foundation where he serves as board chairman. A legitimate charitable foundation that provides technical education scholarships," Walter clarified. "Mr. Kessler's business now pays market-rate rent to the foundation, generating income for its charitable mission." The judge frowned slightly. "When exactly was this transfer initiated, and when was it completed?" "The transfer was initiated 6 months ago, Your Honor," Walter replied, opening a folder. "We have the original transfer documents, signed and notarized on December 15th of last year. The execution of those documents occurred 3 weeks ago, on May 27th. "May I see those documents?" the judge requested. Walter approached the bench, handing over a thick folder of paperwork. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the contents, occasionally looking up at the parties. "Ms. Holden, has your client seen these documents before today?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor. That's precisely our point. Mr. Kessler kept this transfer hidden from his wife." "Mr. Dawson?" Walter cleared his throat. "Actually, Your Honor, if you'll look at page 7 of the transfer agreement, you'll find Mrs. Kessler's signature, dated December 15th, same as Mr. Kessler's." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Aspen leaned forward, whispering urgently to her attorney. "I have no recollection of signing this," she said loudly enough for Lucas to hear. Mrs. Kessler signed several year-end tax documents during the couple's annual meeting with their accountant. Walter continued smoothly. "This was among them. We have the accountant's sworn affidavit confirming her presence and signature." The judge examined the document closely. "This appears to be Mrs. Kessler's signature, notarized properly." "Your Honor," Holden interjected, "my client may have signed this document without understanding its implications. Mr. Kessler clearly took advantage of her trust." "Did your client not read what she was signing?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's not the point, Your Honor. The issue is Mr. Kessler's intent to shield assets from equitable distribution." Walter shook his head. "The intent was charitable giving with tax benefits, Your Honor. The foundation is legitimate, its mission is genuine, and Mrs. Kessler was fully informed." The couple's accountant presented the tax implications in detail at their year-end meeting. The judge continued reviewing the documents, then looked up at Aspen. "Mrs. Kessler, do you recognize your signature on this agreement?" Aspen hesitated, glancing at her attorney before answering. "It looks like my signature, Your Honor, but I signed many documents in my position at the university. I don't specifically recall this one. Yet it's notarized, indicating you were present when signing," the judge noted. "And your husband's accountant has provided an affidavit stating he explained the purpose and implications of this transfer to both of you. Holden tried again. Your Honor, regardless of his signature, the timing of executing this transfer was consistent with tax planning strategy the judge finished for her. The documents were prepared months ago, signed by both parties, and properly notarized. The decision to execute now rather than later may have been influenced by the impending divorce, but the asset transfer itself appears to have been planned well in advance with Mrs. Kessler's knowledge and consent. Lucas kept his expression neutral, but inside, a sense of vindication bloomed. The meeting with the accountant had been real. Aspen had indeed signed the paperwork, though he suspected she had done so without reading it carefully, a habit she developed over years of trusting him to handle their finances. What she hadn't known was that Lucas had deliberately never filed a transfer, keeping it as a contingency, not specifically for divorce, but for any situation where having the property separate from their personal assets might be beneficial. The judge set the documents aside. Based on the evidence presented, I'm not inclined to view this transfer as an improper attempt to hide marital assets. The foundation is legitimate. The paperwork is in order, and both parties consented at the time it was created. She looked between Lucas and Aspen. We will proceed with temporary arrangements based on the current state of assets. Holden's expression tightened, but she nodded respectfully. Yes, Your Honor. The remainder of the hearing proceeded efficiently. Temporary support was set at a modest level given Aspen's own income as a professor. The house they'd shared would remain unoccupied while they determined whether to sell it and split the proceeds. When it was over, Lucas and Walter gathered their documents and stood to leave. Aspen intercepted them near the door, her attorney hovering nearby. You planned this, she said quietly to Lucas, her voice tight with controlled anger. All of it. Lucas met her gaze steadily. I plan to protect what I built, yes. Just like I planned to help students who deserve a chance. The foundation is real, Aspen. The scholarships are real. You made me sign away rights to your most valuable asset without explaining what I was signing. I explained exactly what you were signing, transfer paperwork for tax planning. You chose not to pay attention. Lucas shrugged slightly. You always said you trusted me with the finances. This isn't over, she warned. Actually, it is. Lucas nodded to Walter, who handed Aspen a folder. Inside, you'll find a settlement offer. It's more than fair. The house is yours if you want it, with me buying out your share if you don't. A reasonable cash settlement. A clean break. Why would I accept this? She asked, not opening the folder. Because fighting will cost you more than you'd gain. And because, deep down, you know you're not entitled to my business or its assets. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. Take the deal, Aspen. Walk away with your dignity intact. He and Walter continued past her without waiting for a response. Outside on the courthouse steps, Walter gave an approving nod. Well played, he said, though I doubt she'll accept the initial offer. She will, Lucas replied with quiet certainty. Once she calculates the cost of fighting versus what she'll actually win. Aspen's always been practical. And if she's not, Lucas gazed out at the city skyline, the afternoon sun reflecting off glass towers. Then we'll remind her that pride is expensive, and she's already lost enough. The vineyard venue that had been meant for Laurel's wedding was transformed under Maddox's direction. String lights hung from every available surface, creating a warm glow that complemented the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains. A stage had been set up where the ceremony area would have been, featuring a live band rather than the string quartet Laurel had selected. Instead of formal dinner tables with assigned seating, casual high tops and lounge areas were scattered across the patio and lawn, encouraging mingling. The stodgy, approved caterer had been replaced with food trucks offering everything from gourmet tacos to artisanal ice cream. Lucas parked his newly completed project, a restored 1967 Mustang in pearl white with custom black accents at the edge of the lot, deliberately choosing a spot visible to anyone arriving or leaving. He'd spent the past week finalizing every detail of the car, channeling his energy into creating something beautiful from something broken. He adjusted his charcoal suit jacket as he walked toward the entrance. No tie, just a crisp white shirt open at the collar, elegant but not formal. His usual work boots had been replaced with polished leather shoes, and he'd even visited his barber that morning for a fresh cut. Lucas Kessler. Maddox boomed as Lucas approached the entrance. Man of the hour. They embraced briefly, Maddox slapping him on the back. Quite a turnout, Lucas observed, looking past his friend to the already crowded venue. 300 of Charlotte's most interesting people, Maddox confirmed with a grin. Plus a few from Atlanta, Nashville, even New York. Word got around. About what exactly? About everything. The podcast episode. The wedding drama. Your imminent return to bachelor life. Maddox winked. People love a good comeback story. Lucas shook his head. I'm not sure I want to be a story at all. Too late, brother. But don't worry, you come out looking like the hero. Maddox steered him toward the bar. First drinks on me. Actually, they're all on me. Open bar. Lucas accepted a whiskey and followed Maddox through the crowd. People he knew, clients, industry contacts, old friends, stopped him for conversations that carefully avoided direct mentions of his divorce but carried knowing undertones. Others he'd never met introduced themselves, hinting at having heard his story and expressing admiration for his stand. It was surreal. Moving through this space that should have been his sister-in-law's wedding, now repurposed as a celebration of what? His freedom? His defiance? He wasn't sure. The band began playing a cover of You Can't Always Get What You Want, and Maddox burst into laughter beside him. I may have requested that, he admitted. Too much. Just enough, Lucas replied with a rare smile. As the evening progressed, Lucas found himself relaxing for the first time in months. He talked business with potential clients, reconnected with friends he'd neglected during his marriage, and even danced when Maddox dragged him onto the floor during a particularly energetic song. That it was nearing midnight when he stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The mountain air was cool against his face as he leaned against the stone balustrade overlooking the vineyards below. In the distance, the lights of Charlotte created a hazy glow against the night sky. Movement in the parking lot caught his attention. A figure sat alone in a car, illuminated briefly by the glow of a cell phone screen. Even from a distance, he recognized Laurel's distinctive profile. She appeared to be drinking from a flask, her posture slumped in defeat. Lucas felt no satisfaction at the sight, no vindication or pleasure, just a hollow acknowledgement that some battles left no real winners, only survivors. He turned away, refusing to let her presence intrude on his evening. This party, this moment, was about moving forward, about reclaiming what was not just his business or his assets, but his sense of self. Beautiful night. A voice said beside him. Lucas turned to find a woman he vaguely recognized, one of Maddox's producers, he thought. It is, he agreed. I'm Eliza. She introduced herself. We met briefly at Maddox's studio a few weeks ago. Right? You were coordinating the podcast episode. She nodded. Among other things. Maddox keeps me busy. She leaned against the balustrade beside him, looking out at the view. You know, when he first pitched that episode, I thought it might come across as petty revenge. But wasn't that all, was it? Lucas raised an eyebrow. What was it then? A universal story. Standing up for yourself when the world expects you to just take whatever scraps you're given. She shrugged. People connected with that. I wasn't trying to make a statement. The best statements are the ones we make without trying. Eliza smiled. Anyway, I just wanted to say I admire how you handled everything. With dignity. Lucas studied her for a moment, her direct gaze, the intelligence behind her eyes, the complete absence of pretense in her manner. Thank you, he said simply. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments before Maddox's voice boomed from inside. Where's my man Lucas? Get in here. They're playing your song. Eliza laughed. You're being summoned. Apparently. Lucas hesitated, then asked, would you like to come back inside? Get a drink. I'd like that. She replied. As they walked back into the party, Lucas felt something shift inside him, not romance. Not yet, but possibility. An opening where before there had been only closed doors. Behind them, in the parking lot, Laurel's car started and drove away, taillights disappearing down the winding road. 1 month later, Lucas stood in his workshop, surveying the space with a sense of completion. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed. Aspen had indeed accepted his settlement offer after a single counter that he'd granted without argument. The house had been sold, the proceeds split. Their shared accounts divided. Clean, efficient, final, he'd thrown himself into his work afterward, completing projects that had been on hold, taking on new clients, expanding his team to include 2 young apprentices recipients of scholarships from his foundation who showed exceptional promise. The sound of the door opening announced Maddox's arrival. His friend walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Lucas. "Shop's looking good," Maddox observed, glancing around at the expanded workspace. "Business booming. Can't complain," Lucas confirmed. "Had to turn down 3 projects this month. Thinking of bringing on another full-time mechanic. Success is the best revenge, like I said." Maddox perched on a stool. Heard Aspen got that endowment for her department after all. Despite the ethics review, Lucas shrugged. "Good for her. You don't care. Not my problem anymore." Maddox studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. "You know she's been asking about you. Through mutual friends. Has she? Want to know if you're seeing anyone. If you're still angry." Lucas continued organizing his tools, movements deliberate and precise. "And what did these mutual friends tell her?" "That you seem happier than you've been in years." Maddox hesitated. "Are you? Happier?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "I'm at peace. Which isn't the same thing, but it's what I needed." "And Eliza? You two seem to hit it off at the party." A small smile touched Lucas's lips. "We've had dinner a few times. Taking it slow. Smart man." Maddox finished his coffee. "You know, people still talk about what happened. The wedding that wasn't. The podcast episode. Regina's basically a social pariah now. Turns out a lot of people were just waiting for an excuse to drop her. And Laurel moved to Atlanta, last I heard. Ironic, since that's where Bryce was from. Guess she's starting over." Lucas nodded but offered no comment. He'd long since stopped tracking the McKenzie family's trajectory. Their lives were no longer entangled with his. "What about you?" Maddox asked after a moment. "Any regrets? Would you take Aspen back if she came groveling?" Lucas stopped what he was doing and looked directly at his friend. "Forgiveness is for the weak, Maddox. I don't forgive, I forget. And she's already gone." Cold, Maddox observed, but there was respect in his tone. But fair. They talked about other things than business opportunities. Maddox's expanding podcast network, plans for the weekend. Normal life, moving forward. Later, after Maddox had left, Lucas locked up the workshop and walked to his Mustang. The evening air carried the scent of approaching rain, clean and promising. He got into the car, the engine purring to life with the turn of the key. For a moment, he sat there, hands on the wheel, thinking about the path that had brought him here. The son of a waitress who'd built something from nothing, who'd fallen in love with a woman from another world, who'd tried to bridge a gap that couldn't be crossed, and who'd ultimately chosen self-respect over acceptance. He put the car in gear and drove away from the workshop, headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The past was behind him, burned away like impurities from metal. What remained was stronger for having endured the fire. Lucas Kessler drove into the night, alone but not lonely, separate but complete. Finally, irrevocably, himself. Andrew Collins sat in his parked car outside Mitchell & Associates, staring at the text message that had just lit up his phone screen. His hands trembled slightly as he read it again. "Baby's here. Room 412, St. Mary's Hospital. Can't wait for you to meet our little one." Lacey, 9 months of anticipation had culminated in this moment. He glanced at his watch at 2:47 p.m. The quarterly report he'd been working on could wait. This was the day he'd become a father. "Tom," he called out, practically running into his colleague's office. "The baby's here. I gotta go." Tom looked up from his computer, grinning broadly. "Well, what are you still doing here? Go meet your kid." Andrew was already backing out the door, his suit jacket half on. "Cover for me with Davidson? Consider it done. Now get out of here, Dad." The word "Dad" sent a thrill through Andrew's chest as he hurried through the office. He'd been someone's husband for 5 years, but father, that was a new title. One he couldn't wait to claim. "Did I in the elevator?" He loosened his blue silk tie, the one Lacey had given him for their anniversary last year. The memory of that evening flooded back, how they'd celebrated by discussing baby names over dinner. arguing playfully about whether they wanted a boy or a girl. Lacey had been adamant about waiting to find out the gender, wanting it to be a surprise. Like Christmas morning, she'd said, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and Andrew rushed to his car, fumbling with his keys in his haste. As he slid into the driver's seat, his eyes fell on the stuffed bear sitting in the passenger seat. He bought it weeks ago, a soft, cream-colored teddy bear wearing a tiny blue bow tie. The sight of it brought back the day he and Lacey had painted the nursery, how she'd teased him about being too perfectionist with the corners. The baby won't care if the stripes aren't perfectly straight, she'd laughed, a smudge of yellow paint on her cheek. Maybe not, he'd replied, carefully touching up the edges. But I will. Andrew smiled at the memory as he pulled out of the parking garage into the bright afternoon sun. Traffic was light for a Thursday, and he silently thanked whatever forces were responsible for that small mercy. His mind wandered to the last 9 months. The doctor's appointments, the birthing classes, the late-night ice cream runs to satisfy Lacey's cravings. It had been a journey they'd shared together. Every step of the way, or so he'd thought. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took exactly 17 minutes. Andrew knew because he counted every one of them, his excitement building with each passing moment. He'd driven this route dozens of times for checkups and ultrasounds, but this time felt different. This time, he would leave the hospital as a father. The parking lot was busy, but Andrew managed to find a spot close to the entrance. As he grabbed the teddy bear from the passenger seat, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his mother-in-law. Shirley, are you almost here? Something about the message felt off. No congratulations, no excitement, just a simple question. Andrew brushed off the feeling, attributing it to his mother-in-law's typically direct communication style. Just parked, he texted back, then pocketed his phone. The automatic doors whooshed open as he approached, releasing a blast of cool air-conditioned air. The hospital lobby was bustling with activity, visitors carrying flowers and balloons, staff in scrubs hurrying past, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished floors. Andrew nodded to the volunteer at the information desk. Already knowing his way to the maternity ward, did I end the elevator? He found himself sharing the space with an elderly couple carrying a pink balloon that proclaimed, "It's a girl." The woman smiled at him, noticing the teddy bear in his hands. "First time?" she asked kindly. Andrew nodded, unable to suppress his grin. "Is it that obvious?" "You have that look," the man chuckled. "Same one I had 40 years ago, when our first came along. Nothing quite like it, is there, Martha?" "Nothing in the world," his wife agreed, squeezing her husband's hand. The elevator stopped at the 4th floor, and Andrew let the couple exit first. As he stepped out into the hallway, the familiar antiseptic smell of hospital mixed with the scent of flowers from various rooms. His shoes squeaked against the freshly waxed floor as he made his way down the corridor. Following the signs to room 412, the maternity ward was quieter than the main lobby, with nurses speaking in hushed tones at their station and the occasional cry of a newborn echoing from behind closed doors. Andrew's pace quickened as he approached Lacey's room, his heart racing with anticipation. Then he saw Shirley. His mother-in-law stood outside room 412 like a sentry, her usually warm face etched with worry. She wore a navy blue dress that seemed somehow more severe than her usual style, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When she spotted him, something flickered across her face. Was it fear? Guilt? Before she stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between him and the door. "Andrew," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual warmth. "I think you should wait out here for a moment." He felt his smile fade, replaced by a frown of confusion. "What? Why?" His grip tightened on the teddy bear. "Is something wrong with the baby?" "With Lacey?" Shirley's face tightened, lines appearing around her mouth that he'd never noticed before. "It's complicated. Just give me a few minutes to talk to Lacey first." A cold feeling began to spread through Andrew's chest, completely at odds with the excitement he'd felt moments ago. He'd known Shirley for 5 years, ever since he'd started dating Lacey. She'd always been warm, welcoming, treating him like the son she never had. But now, no, he said firmly, taking a step forward. "That's my wife and my child in there. I'm not waiting." Shirley's hand shot out, pressing against his chest. "Please, Andrew, listen to me." "Listen to what?" His voice rose slightly, drawing a sharp look from a passing nurse. He lowered it, continuing, "Shirley, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "I'm trying to protect you both," she whispered, her eyes pleading. "Just give me 5 minutes with her. Please." Andrew studied her face, noting the strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she held it against his chest. Something was very, very wrong. "Protect us from what?" he demanded, his patience wearing thin. "Shirley, move aside." "Andrew, wait." He pushed past her, his larger frame easily breaking her attempt to block him. The teddy bear dropped from his hands as he grabbed the door handle, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Behind him, he heard Shirley's sharp intake of breath. But he was already pushing the door open. The first thing that struck him was how normal everything seemed. The room was bathed in warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, creating a peaceful atmosphere. There were flowers on the windowsill, roses, he noted absently, probably from Lacey's sister. The steady beep of monitors created a rhythmic background noise, almost soothing in its regularity. Lacey lay in the hospital bed, her chestnut hair damp with sweat and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked tired but beautiful, cradling a bundle of white hospital blankets in her arms. For one perfect moment, the scene matched exactly what he'd imagined countless times over the past 9 months. Then he saw the baby's face. Andrew felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The child in Lacey's arms was clearly biracial, with beautiful brown skin that contrasted sharply against the white hospital blanket. He stared, unable to process what he was seeing, his mind refusing to accept the obvious truth before him. Lacey looked up, her face draining of color. "Andrew," she whispered, clutching the baby closer to her chest. "I can explain." "Explain?" The word came out as a hoarse whisper. He took a step forward, then back, as if his body couldn't decide whether to approach or flee. "Explain what, Lacey?" "How our child. How my child." The words died in his throat. Tears welled up in Lacey's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Please, baby, just listen to me. It was a mistake. One terrible mistake. A mistake." Andrew's voice rose, causing the baby to stir. "Getting the wrong coffee order is a mistake. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. This," he gestured at the child, "this is a choice. A series of choices. Choices you made every time you decided to." He broke off, unable to finish the thought. Shirley slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind her. "Keep your voice down," she urged. "This isn't the place for." "You knew." Andrew turned on her, his eyes blazing. "You knew this would happen. That's why you tried to stop me from coming in." "How long have you known?" "I just found out when the baby was born," Shirley defended, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. "I was trying to protect everyone, to give Lacey a chance to tell you properly." Andrew laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that seemed to bounce off the hospital walls. "Protect everyone? Where was this protection when your daughter was cheating on me? When she was lying to my face for months?" "Andrew, please," Lacey begged, her voice cracking. "We can work through this. We can raise this baby together. All you have to do is sign the birth certificate." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, wondering if he'd ever really known her at all. "Sign the birth certificate? You want me to claim a child that isn't mine? To take responsibility for your infidelity?" "You're my husband," Lacey said, her voice growing stronger even as tears continued to fall. "We made vows to each other, in sickness and in health, for better or worse. Those vows included faithfulness." Andrew cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "Or did you forget that part while you were sleeping with someone else?" The baby began to cry, its wails filling the tense silence that followed. Lacey rocked the child gently, making soft shushing sounds while Shirley moved to her daughter's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "The birth certificate needs to be filled out," Shirley said quietly. "As her husband, you're legally—" "I'm not signing anything," Andrew declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Not without a DNA test." Lacey's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "A DNA test? You would really do that to me? To your child? My child?" Andrew's voice cracked on the words. "Look at that baby, Lacey. Really look? We both know it's not mine." He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its usual neat appearance. How long? What? How long have you been cheating on me? Was it a one-time thing, or have you been lying to me our entire marriage? Lacey's face crumpled. It wasn't like that. It happened a few times. I never meant for. For what? For me to find out? For the truth to be so obvious that you couldn't hide it? Andrew paced the small room, feeling like a caged animal. Who is he? The silence that followed was deafening. Lacey looked down at the baby, avoiding his gaze while Shirley shifted uncomfortably beside her. You know what? Don't tell me. I don't want to know. Andrew stopped pacing, his wedding ring suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I'm not signing that birth certificate. Not now, not ever. You want someone's name on that document? Put the real father's name on it. You can't just walk away, Lacey protested, her voice rising with desperation. This is your responsibility too. We're married. Andrew turned back, his eyes cold. My responsibility? You destroy our marriage, try to trick me into raising another man's child. And you have the audacity to talk about responsibility. Andrew, please, Lacey sobbed. I love you. We can get past this. We can love me? He cut her off, his voice thick with disgust. If this is your version of love, I want no part of it. You didn't just cheat on me, Lacey. You were going to let me believe this child was mine. You were going to watch me raise it, love it, all while knowing the truth. What kind of person does that? I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you. Well, congratulations, Andrew said, his voice eerily calm. You just did. He reached the door, his hand gripping the handle, so tight his knuckles turned white. The teddy bear still lay where he'd dropped it, its cheerful blue bow tie now seeming like a cruel joke. My lawyer will be in touch about the DNA test, he said, not turning around. And Lacey, don't try to put my name on that birth certificate. That would be fraud, and I will fight it with everything I have. With those words, he pulled open the door and walked out. The sound of Lacey's sobs followed him down the hallway, mixing with the baby's cries, but he didn't look back. His footsteps echoed through the corridor as he made his way to the elevator, each step taking him further from the life he thought he had, from the future he'd planned. The elderly couple from earlier was getting off the elevator as he approached, the pink balloon bobbing cheerfully between them. The woman's smile faded as she saw his face, but Andrew barely noticed. He stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby with more force than necessary. That eye in the mirrored walls, he caught his reflection. The man who had entered the hospital less than an hour ago, excited, happy, ready to embrace fatherhood, was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone whose trust had been shattered, whose world had been turned upside down. As he walked through the hospital lobby, the afternoon sun still shone brightly outside, but Andrew barely noticed it. His mind was already racing ahead, planning his next steps. He would need a lawyer. He would need proof. He would need to protect himself from whatever Lacey might try next. He reached his car and sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly. The emptiness of the passenger seat, where the teddy bear had been, seemed to mock him. His phone buzzed, probably Shirley or Lacey, but he ignored it. One thing was certain, he would never forgive this betrayal. Never. The front door slammed behind Andrew with enough force to rattle the family photos lining the hallway wall. One frame tilted precariously, their wedding photo, with Lacey in white and him in his black tuxedo, both smiling at a future that now lay in ruins. He reached out automatically to straighten it, then stopped, his hand hovering in midair. Instead, he grabbed the frame and slammed it face down on the side table. The house felt different now, tainted. Everything he looked at held memories that suddenly felt poisoned. The cream-colored couch where they'd spent countless evenings watching movies. The kitchen where they'd cooked together, dancing to old songs on the radio. The nursery upstairs that he'd spent weekends perfecting. Believing he was preparing for his child, his tie felt like it was choking him, and he yanked it off with trembling hands, throwing it onto the kitchen counter. It landed next to the pregnancy calendar Lacey had been keeping, each week meticulously marked with baby's development milestones. He stared at it, wondering how many of those weeks she'd spent with him, and how many with. His phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with yet another call from Lacey, the 17th since he'd left the hospital. Between her and Shirley, they bombarded him with messages. Please come back. We need to talk about this. Don't make any hasty decisions. Think about the baby. Let me explain everything. Andrew scrolled through them, each message stoking his anger higher. The last one from Lacey made him clench his jaw. The baby needs a father. Should have thought about that before, he muttered. Tossing the phone onto the couch, his feet carried him to Lacey's home office, a small room just off the living room that still held traces of her vanilla perfume. Pregnancy books and parenting magazines littered her desk, their cheerful covers now seeming to mock him. But Andrew wasn't interested in those. His eyes fixed on her laptop, sitting closed on the desk where she'd left it yesterday morning. Had it only been yesterday, when everything was normal? When he'd kissed her goodbye, his hand resting on her pregnant belly, believing he was touching his child. Time to see what other lies you've been telling, he said to the empty room, pulling out the desk chair and sitting down. The laptop hummed to life, the password prompt appearing on screen. He typed in their anniversary date, 0922, the same password she'd used for years. The screen unlocked immediately. His hands hesitated over the keyboard. Did he really want to know? Could the truth be worse than what he was imagining? Looking for something? Andrew spun around, startled. Tom stood in the doorway, still in his work suit, concern etched on his face. How did you get in? Spare key, remember? The one you gave me last year, when you went on that business trip? Tom stepped into the room, his eyes taking in Andrew's disheveled appearance. You weren't answering your phone, and after you left work like that, I was worried. What happened? Andrew's laugh was harsh, brittle. What happened? I'll tell you what happened. I want to meet my child today, except it wasn't my child. Turns out my wife's been busy with someone else. Jesus Christ. Tom moved further into the room, dropping his briefcase by the door. Are you sure? The baby's biracial, Tom. Kind of hard to miss that detail when both Lacey and I are white. Shit. Tom ran a hand through his hair, messing up his usually neat appearance. What are you going to do? Right now. Andrew turned back to the laptop. I'm going to find out exactly what else my loving wife has been hiding. It didn't take long to find the evidence. In her email drafts folder, he found messages to someone named Javier. Dozens of them, spanning months. Found him, Andrew said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He began reading aloud. Javier, we need to talk about what happens when the baby comes. Andrew can't know, it would destroy everything. I think it's best if you keep your distance for a while. Tom moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Check the date on that one. 3 months ago. Andrew clicked through more messages. Here's another one. I know this isn't fair to you, but please understand. Andrew's a good man. He'll be a wonderful father. We just need to give it time. She was planning this the whole time? Looks that way. Andrew's fingers clenched on the mouse. She was trying to convince him to stay away, probably hoping I'd never notice. They were both going to watch me raise his child, knowing the truth the whole time. You need a lawyer, Tom said firmly. Like yesterday? Already on it. Andrew pulled out his phone, ignoring 3 new messages from Lacey. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. James Morrison's office, a crisp voice answered. This is Andrew Collins. I need to speak with James immediately. It's urgent. One moment, please. While they waited, Tom paced the room. What about the birth certificate? Did she try to get you to sign it? Oh, she did more than try. Andrew's jaw clenched at the memory. Tried to guilt me into it with some bullshit about marriage vows and responsibility. As if I'm responsible for her affair. Mr. Collins? A new voice came through the speaker. James Morrison here. What can I do for you? I need your help, James. My wife just gave birth to another man's child and tried to get me to sign the birth certificate. There was a brief pause. Are you certain about paternity? The baby's clearly biracial. Neither my wife nor I are. I see. Papers rustled in the background. Don't sign anything. Not the birth certificate, not hospital forms, nothing. I'm clearing my schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Can you come to my office in an hour? I'll be there. And Andrew? Start documenting everything. Every conversation. Every text message. Save any emails or evidence you find. We'll need it all. After hanging up, Andrew turned back to the laptop. I need to copy these emails. Let me help, Tom offered, pulling out a USB drive from his briefcase. We should document everything systematically. Create a timeline. They worked in silence for several minutes, saving emails, and taking screenshots. Then Andrew's phone rang again. "Lacey, you should answer it," Tom suggested. "Record the conversation. Could be useful later." Andrew nodded, activating his phone's recording feature before answering. "What?" "Andrew, please." Lacey's voice was hoarse from crying. "You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. I need to explain." "Talk about what?" "How you've been cheating on me? How you were going to trick me into raising another man's child? Or maybe you want to explain all those lovely emails to Javier?" There was a sharp intake of breath. "What emails? Have you been going through my private things?" "Private?" Andrew's laugh was cold. "Like your private affair? Your private plan to commit paternity fraud?" "It's not fraud. I made a mistake." "But a mistake?" Andrew's voice rose. "Was it a mistake when you slept with him? When you got pregnant? When you spent months planning to deceive me? I was scared. I didn't know what to do. How about telling the truth? Or is that concept too difficult for you to grasp?" There was a pause. Then Lacey's voice turned harder. "The hospital needs the birth certificate filed. They're asking questions. We need to handle this. Not my problem. It is your problem. You're my husband. Legally, I'm requesting a DNA test before signing anything. And Lacey, I've seen the emails to Javier. All of them, including the ones where you planned how to keep him quiet while I raised his child." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Lacey spoke again, her voice trembled. "You don't understand. Javier doesn't want what? Responsibility? Funny how that works, isn't it? Well, guess what? Neither do I. Not for your lies. Not for your affair. And definitely not for another man's child." The hospital's pushing for the paperwork. Lacey's voice turned desperate. "They need it filed today. Please, Andrew, we can work through this. We can get counseling. We can. The only thing we're getting is divorce. My lawyer will be in touch about the DNA test." "Your lawyer?" Her voice cracked. "Andrew, please don't do this. We can work this out. The baby needs a father. The baby has a father. His name is Javier. Put his name on the birth certificate." "I can't. He doesn't want." Lacey stopped abruptly. "Doesn't want to be involved? Shocking. Well, that's between you and him now. I want no part of it. You're really going to do this?" Lacey's voice hardened. "After 5 years of marriage? You're just going to walk away?" "No, Lacey. You did this. You walked away the moment you decided to sleep with another man. You destroyed our marriage with every lie you told, every time you met him, every moment you planned to deceive me. And now you're going to face the consequences. Is that what you want? To punish me? What I want is the truth. For once in your life, try telling it. Put Javier's name on the birth certificate. Take responsibility for your choices. And if I don't?" There was a challenge in her voice now. "What if I put your name down anyway? Then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. Every email, every lie, every detail of your affair, all of it will come out in court. How do you think that will look? A fraud charge on your record? Your reputation in ruins? You wouldn't dare. Try me?" The line went silent for a moment. "I'm sorry," Lacey finally whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. But you did. Every day you lied. Every time you met him. Every moment you planned to deceive me. You chose to hurt me. And now you're going to face the consequences." He ended the call, his hands shaking. Tom stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" "No." Andrew looked at his friend. "But I will be, after I make sure she can't get away with this." An hour later, Andrew sat in James Morrison's office, watching the lawyer review the evidence they'd gathered. James was a tall man with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. His office walls were lined with law books and certificates, speaking to decades of experience. He scrolled through the emails, his expression growing grimmer with each one. "Well," James finally said, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk, "she's certainly made our job easier with these emails. Clear evidence of intent to deceive. What are my options? First, we file for the DNA test immediately. Given the visible evidence of non-paternity, no judge will deny that request. Once we have the results, we can prevent her from listing you as the father. And if she tries anyway, then we file fraud charges." James leaned forward, his expression serious. "But Andrew, you need to be prepared. She might get desperate. People often do in these situations. What do you mean? She might try to claim you knew about the affair, that you agreed to raise the child anyway. Or she might attempt to manipulate you emotionally, use your history together against you. 5 years of marriage gives her a lot of ammunition. Andrew's jaw clenched. I won't fall for it. Good. James began typing on his computer. I'm drafting the DNA test request now. We'll have it filed within the hour. In the meantime, document everything. Every call, every text, every interaction. And Andrew, he looked up seriously. Stay away from the hospital. Any contact should go through me. Not a problem. Andrew stood, straightening his jacket. I never want to see her again. Over the next few weeks, Andrew threw himself into building his case. The DNA test was scheduled and completed with clinical efficiency. He avoided the hospital entirely, letting his lawyer handle all communication. Each day brought new messages from Lacey and her family, alternating between pleas and threats. Please, just talk to me. You're being unreasonable. Think about what you're throwing away. You'll regret this. He saved them all without responding, building a file of evidence that grew thicker by the day. Tom stopped by regularly, bringing food and offering support. While James kept him updated on the legal proceedings, then the test results arrived. Andrew sat in James's office, staring at the paper that confirmed what he'd known from the moment he saw the baby. The numbers were clear. Definitively, the child was not his. There was zero chance of paternity. What now? He asked, looking up at his lawyer. Now we move forward with the divorce proceedings. The DNA test proves non-paternity, so she can't legally name you as the father. But Andrew, James paused, his expression serious. She's already tried. What? She filed the birth certificate yesterday. Listed you as the father. The paper crumpled in Andrew's fist. After everything? After the DNA test? She's desperate, James said calmly. But this works in our favor. We can now add attempted fraud to the divorce filing. The penalties for knowingly falsifying a birth certificate are significant. Andrew's phone buzzed Lacey again. This time he answered. How dare you? She hissed before he could speak. The hospital called about your lawyer's letter. A fraud complaint? Really? You listed me as the father after a DNA test proved I'm not. What would you call it? I call it you abandoning your responsibilities. Your family. My family? Andrew's laugh was bitter. You destroyed any chance of that when you decided to sleep with another man. When you tried to trap me into raising his child. I was trying to keep us together. By lying? By committing fraud? Face it, Lacey, you weren't trying to keep us together. You were trying to protect yourself, to avoid facing the consequences of your actions. What do you want from me? Her voice cracked. The truth. For once in your life, try telling the truth. Put Javier's name on the birth certificate. Take responsibility for your choices. He won't help, she admitted quietly. He wants nothing to do with us. He's blocked my number. You won't return my calls. Not my problem. You chose him, remember? Now deal with it. He ended the call, turning back to James. What's our next step? We filed a fraud complaint, James said, already pulling up documents on his computer. Between the DNA test, the emails, and her filing a false birth certificate, we have a strong case. She'll face fines, possibly community service. Good? Andrew stood his decision firm. File everything. I want her to face every possible consequence for what she's done. And the divorce? Fast as possible. I want this over. As he left the lawyer's office, Andrew felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth was out, documented in black and white. Lacey's lies were exposed, her attempts at manipulation thwarted. She would face the consequences of her actions, and he would be free. His phone buzzed again, another message from Lacey. He deleted it without reading it. Some betrayals went too deep for forgiveness, some lies too far for redemption. She had made her choices, and now she would live with them, just as he would live with his. Never to trust her again, never to forgive, never to forget. The Suffolk County Courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its imposing stone facade catching the early September light. Andrew stood at the bottom of the granite steps, adjusting the knot of his navy blue tie, a new one, purchased after he'd thrown away everything Lacey had ever given him. The autumn air carried a hint of chill, Matching the cold determination in his heart, Tom pulled up in his black BMW, parking smoothly at the curb. He stepped out, also wearing a crisp suit, his expression serious. "Thought you might want backup," he said, joining Andrew at the steps. "Thanks." Andrew checked his watch at 8:45 a.m. James said to meet him at 9. "Nervous?" Andrew shook his head. "No, just ready for this to be over." As if summoned by their conversation, James Morrison appeared at the top of the steps, his silver hair catching the sunlight. The lawyer descended to meet them, his leather briefcase polished to a shine. "They're already inside," James informed them, his tone professional. "Lacey arrived with her lawyer and her mother about 15 minutes ago." "What about him?" Andrew asked, his voice hardening. "Is Javier going to show his face?" James shook his head. "No sign of him. According to my sources, he's left the state entirely. Moved to Arizona last month." "Coward," Tom muttered, echoing Andrew's thoughts. "Better this way," James said pragmatically. "His absence only strengthens our case about abandonment and Lacey's desperate attempts to find a replacement father." They climbed the courthouse steps together, Andrew's shoes clicking against the granite. Inside, they passed through security, the metal detector beeping as Andrew emptied his pockets into the plastic tray. The marble hallway stretched before them, their reflections ghosting along the polished floor as they walked to courtroom 3 to outside the heavy wooden doors. James paused, turning to face Andrew. "A few final points," the lawyer said quietly. "Let me do most of the talking. When you're called to testify, stick to the facts. Don't let emotion—" "I won't." Andrew cut him off, his voice steady. "Trust me, I want everyone to hear exactly what she did. Calmly. Clearly. No drama needed. The truth is damning enough." "The DNA results and emails are our strongest evidence," James continued. "Combined with her attempted filing of the fraudulent birth certificate, it paints a clear picture of intent to deceive." "What kind of defense is she planning?" Tom asked. "From what I've heard, they're going for emotional distress and temporary poor judgment. Her lawyer, Victoria Parker, is known for turning criminal cases into emotional appeals." Andrew's jaw tightened. "She can try. But emails planning deception months in advance don't sound very temporary to me." They pushed through the doors into the courtroom. The room was smaller than Andrew had expected, with dark wood paneling and rows of wooden benches. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Lacey sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s wearing a charcoal gray suit. The past months hadn't been kind to Lacey. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Shirley occupied the first row behind them, her face drawn with worry, hands clutching a tissue. When Andrew entered, Lacey's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, he saw a flash of their old connection, 5 years of shared life and love. Then he remembered the emails, the lies, the betrayal, and his heart hardened again. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Margaret Chin entered. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair pulled back severely from her face, her dark eyes sharp and alert behind rectangular glasses. After everyone was seated, she surveyed the room with practiced efficiency. "We're here today regarding the matter of Collins versus Collins," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, specifically addressing charges of attempted paternity fraud. "Mr. Morrison, you may proceed with your opening statement." James stood, smoothly buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, this is a clear and egregious case of attempted paternity fraud. The evidence will show that Mrs. Collins not only engaged in an extramarital affair resulting in pregnancy, but also attempted to deceive my client into accepting paternity of a child that DNA testing has conclusively proved is not his. Furthermore, after receiving these DNA results, Mrs. Collins still attempted to file a birth certificate naming my client as the father, a deliberate and calculated act of fraud." He gestured to the evidence boxes on their table. "We will present emails showing months of premeditation, DNA results confirming non-paternity, and documentation of Mrs. Collins's attempt to file false information on a legal document." This was not a moment of confusion or desperation, but a carefully planned deception that would have trapped my client into decades of financial and emotional responsibility for another man's child. The judge nodded, then turned to Lacey's lawyer. Ms. Parker, your response? Victoria Parker rose smoothly, her movement practiced and elegant. Your Honor, while my client acknowledges errors in judgment regarding her personal life, her actions were driven by fear and a desperate desire to preserve her marriage, not malicious intent. She is a first-time mother who made choices under extreme emotional duress, facing abandonment by the biological father and fearing the destruction of her family. Poor judgment, Andrew muttered under his breath. That's what they're calling fraud now? Tom placed a warning hand on his arm. Mr. Morrison, Judge Chin directed, call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Andrew Collins to the stand. Andrew walked to the witness box, feeling Lacey's eyes on him the whole way. The bailiff approached with a Bible, and Andrew placed his hand on it, swearing to tell the truth, something his wife had forgotten how to do after being sworn in. Andrew sat facing the courtroom, his posture straight and determined. The wooden chair was uncomfortable, but he welcomed the discomfort. It helped him stay focused. Mr. Collins, James began, approaching the witness stand, please tell the court about the events of June 15th, when your wife gave birth. I was at work when I received a text from Lacey telling me to come to St. Mary's Hospital. Andrew testified, his voice clear and controlled. When I arrived at room 412, I found my mother-in-law, Shirley, attempting to prevent me from entering. Upon pushing past her and entering the room, I discovered that the baby was clearly biracial, while both Lacey and I are white. And what was your immediate reaction? Objection, Ms. Parker interrupted. Calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, James said smoothly. What did you do next, Mr. Collins? I asked Lacey for an explanation. She admitted to having an affair, but tried to convince me to sign the birth certificate despite the obvious evidence that I couldn't be the father. How did she attempt to convince you? Andrew's jaw tightened slightly. She tried to use our marriage vows against me, saying it was my responsibility as her husband to accept the child regardless of paternity. When I refused and requested a DNA test, she became hostile and manipulative. Objection, Your Honor, Ms. Parker called out. Characterization. I'll rephrase, Andrew said before the judge could respond. She started threatening me with legal action if I didn't sign, saying she would put my name on the certificate whether I agreed or not. James walked to his table and picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit A emails recovered from Mrs. Collins's computer, showing correspondence with the biological father over a period of several months. Objection. Ms. Parker stood. Those emails were obtained without my client's consent. This constitutes an invasion of privacy. Your Honor, James countered. The computer was shared marital property, used by both parties throughout their marriage. Furthermore, Mrs. Collins used Mr. Collins's anniversary as her password, indicating no expectation of privacy. The emails were discovered during routine use of a shared device. Judge Chun considered briefly. Overruled. The emails will be admitted. Proceed, Mr. Morrison. James handed the printouts to Andrew. Please read the highlighted portion from the email dated March 12th, 3 months before the birth. Andrew cleared his throat and read, Javier, we need to talk about what happens when the baby comes. Andrew can't know. It would destroy everything. I think it's best if you keep your distance for a while. Andrew will be a wonderful father. We just need to give it time. I know this isn't fair to you, but please understand. Once everything settles down, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Andrew looked directly at Lacey as he read, watching her sink lower in her chair, her face pale. And when was this email written? James prompted. 3 months before the birth, and approximately 6 months after she became pregnant. Were there other emails? Yes, dozens of them, spanning several months. They discussed how to keep the affair hidden, how to handle the birth, and plans to deceive me into raising the child as my own. James nodded. And the DNA test results? Showed zero possibility of paternity, Andrew stated firmly. Yet the day after receiving these results, Lacey attempted to file a birth certificate naming me as the father. Ms. Parker stood for cross-examination, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached. Her perfume, something expensive and floral, wafted over the witness stand. "Mr. Collins," she began, her voice gentle but probing, "in 5 years of marriage, had my client ever given you reason to doubt her before?" "No," Andrew admitted. "She was very good at lying." "Objection, Your Honor," Ms. Parker said. Non-responsive. Sustained. Judge Chin agreed. "The witness will limit answers to the questions asked." "Let me rephrase," Ms. Parker continued. "Mr. Collins, would you say your marriage was happy before this incident?" "I thought it was. Clearly, I was wrong." "And when you discovered the truth about the baby, did you make any attempt to discuss the situation with my client? To understand her perspective? What was there to discuss?" Andrew's voice remained steady. "The evidence of her infidelity was literally in her arms." "Did you consider marriage counseling? Working through this as a couple?" "Work through what? The months of lies? The careful planning to deceive me? The attempt to trap me into raising another man's child?" "Objection," James called out. Argumentative. Sustained. Judge Chin nodded. "Ms. Parker, please keep your questions focused." "Mr. Collins," Ms. Parker tried again, "isn't it true that you abandoned my client at the hospital? That you refused to even discuss the situation?" "I refused to participate in fraud," Andrew corrected. "I left the hospital when your client tried to coerce me into signing a false birth certificate. Then I contacted a lawyer to protect my rights." "And you never considered forgiveness? The possibility of preserving your marriage?" "Forgiveness?" Andrew leaned forward slightly. "Your client didn't just have an affair. She planned to deceive me into raising another man's child. She wrote emails plotting how to keep the truth hidden. Even after a DNA test proved I wasn't the father, she tried to legally trap me with a fraudulent birth certificate. What exactly about that deserves forgiveness?" Ms. Parker shifted tactics, her voice softening with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Collins, you and my client were trying to have a child for some time before this incident, weren't you?" "We were," Andrew acknowledged, his expression guarded. "And there were difficulties conceiving." "Objection," James interrupted. "Relevance? Goes to state of mind, Your Honor," Ms. Parker argued. "The context of their fertility struggles is important to understanding my client's actions." "I'll allow it," Judge Chin ruled. "But keep it brief." "Mr. Collins," Ms. Parker continued, "isn't it possible that my client's actions, while misguided, came from a place of desperation? Of wanting to give you the family you both desired?" Andrew's eyes hardened. "No, Mrs. Parker, it's not possible. Your client's actions came from a place of selfishness and deception. She wasn't thinking about what I desired. She was thinking about what she could get away with." "That's quite an assumption about her motivations." "It's not an assumption. It's written in her own words." Andrew gestured to the emails. "She didn't write about giving me a family. She wrote about how to keep her affair hidden, how to manipulate me into accepting a situation based on lies." The questioning continued, but Andrew remained composed, answering each attempt to paint him as unreasonable with clear, factual responses. When he finally stepped down, he caught Tom's approving nod from the gallery. Lacey was called next. She walked to the witness stand with forced confidence. But Andrew noticed how her hands twisted nervously in her lap, a gesture he'd seen countless times during their marriage, usually when she was hiding something. "Mrs. Collins," Ms. Parker began gently, "please explain to the court what led to your actions." "I was scared," Lacey said, her voice trembling slightly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I knew it might be Javier's, but I hoped it might be Andrew's. We've been trying for a baby for so long, going through fertility treatments, dealing with disappointment month after month. And when you realized the truth about the paternity, I panicked." Tears welled in her eyes. "Javier wanted nothing to do with us. He said he never wanted children, that his career came first. I thought if I just kept quiet, if Andrew never knew." She wiped at her eyes. "He would have been such a wonderful father." "Objection," James called out. "Speculation and irrelevant." Sustained. Judge Chin agreed. "Mrs. Collins," Ms. Parker redirected, "why did you attempt to file the birth certificate with Mr. Collins's name?" "I was alone. Scared. The hospital was pressuring me for the paperwork, and Javier had blocked my number. I didn't know what else to do, even after the DNA test results. I thought maybe if he just had time to think about it, to calm down." Lacey's voice cracked. "We were happy once. We could have been happy again. James stood for cross-examination, his expression stern. Mrs. Collins, you claim you were scared, yet your emails show careful planning over several months. You deliberately orchestrated this deception, didn't you? I was trying to protect my marriage. By lying? By attempting to commit fraud? I made a mistake. A mistake is an accident, Mrs. Collins. You made choices, multiple choices, over multiple months, to deceive your husband. James picked up one of the emails. In this message from April, you wrote to Mr. Ramirez, and I quote, "We need to be careful. Andrew can't suspect anything. Once he signs the birth certificate, everything will be easier." Does that sound like panic to you? Or does it sound like premeditation? Lacey's composure cracked. What was I supposed to do? Javier abandoned us. I needed help. You needed to trap my client into financial responsibility for another man's child. James finished coldly. In fact, let's talk about Mr. Ramirez. When did the affair begin? Last summer, at a company conference in Chicago. And it continued for how long? A few months, Lacey whispered, during which time you were actively trying to conceive with my client. Yes. So you were aware of the possibility of pregnancy by another man. Yet you continued to let my client believe any child would be his. I didn't think. Exactly. You didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about the legal implications. You didn't think about how this deception would affect my client. James paused. Tell me, Mrs. Collins, did Mr. Ramirez know about your plan to name my client as the father's? Lacey's face crumpled. Yes. He agreed it would be better that way. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that his career was just taking off. So you both conspired to deceive my client. Objection. Ms. Parker called out. Argumentative. Withdrawn, James said smoothly. Mrs. Collins, after the DNA test conclusively proved my client was not the father, why did you attempt to file the birth certificate with his name? I was desperate. The hospital needed the paperwork, and Javier wouldn't return my calls. I thought if I just filed it, Andrew would eventually what? Accept the fraud? Take responsibility for another man's actions. I'm a single mother. Lacey burst out. Do you know how hard that is? I needed help, and you thought the solution was to commit fraud. The evidence continued to mount. James presented the DNA test results, complete with statistical analysis showing zero possibility of paternity. He called hospital staff who testified about Lacey's attempts to file paperwork without Andrew's presence or consent. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of deliberate deception. Finally, Judge Chin called for closing statements. James rose first, buttoning his jacket as he approached the bench. Your Honor, the evidence presented today clearly shows a pattern of deliberate deception culminating in an attempt at paternity fraud. Mrs. Collins's actions were not mistakes or moments of panic, but calculated choices made over several months. The emails demonstrate premeditation. The DNA test proves non-paternity. And her attempt to file a fraudulent birth certificate after receiving the DNA results shows a complete disregard for both the law and my client's rights. He picked up one of the emails. Mrs. Collins wrote, once he signs the birth certificate, everything will be easier. This wasn't about love or family. This was about trapping my client into financial responsibility for another man's child. She conspired with her lover to deceive her husband, planned the deception for months, and even after being caught, attempted to commit legal fraud. These actions have caused my client significant emotional damage and could have resulted in decades of financial obligation had they succeeded. James turned slightly, gesturing toward Andrew. My client came to the hospital that day expecting to meet his child. Instead, he discovered a web of lies that destroyed his marriage and threatened his future. We asked the court to hold Mrs. Collins accountable for her actions and send a clear message that paternity fraud is not a solution to personal problems. Ms. Parker's closing argument struck a different tone. Your Honor, no one disputes that my client made serious errors in judgment. But we must consider the context. Here was a woman who had struggled with infertility, who found herself pregnant in difficult circumstances, abandoned by the biological father. Were her choices right? No. Were they made with malicious intent? Also no. She walked closer to Lacey's table. My client acted out of fear and desperation, facing single motherhood and the collapse of her marriage. She hasn't denied her mistakes. She's admitted them openly in this court. What she needs is not punishment, but understanding and a chance to make amends. Understanding? Andrew muttered under his breath. Tom squeezed his shoulder in support. Judge Chin removed her glasses, studying both parties carefully before speaking. Having heard all the evidence and testimony presented, this court is ready to render its decision. The courtroom fell silent. Lacey gripped her lawyer's arm, while Shirley leaned forward in her seat, still clutching her tissue. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of attempted paternity fraud. Mrs. Collins not only engaged in a months-long deception, but also attempted to submit false information on a legal document even after DNA evidence proved non-paternity. This is not a case of confusion or temporary poor judgment, but of deliberate fraud. Judge Chin fixed Lacey with a stern look. Mrs. Collins, your actions show a disturbing disregard for both the law and your husband's rights. The emails presented demonstrate that this was not a panic-driven mistake, but a calculated attempt to deceive. You involved the biological father in this deception, planned it for months, and even after being confronted with DNA evidence, attempted to proceed with the fraud. She shuffled some papers on her bench. You are hereby ordered to pay a fine of $5,000 and complete 100 hours of community service. Furthermore, this fraud conviction will remain on your record. Mr. Collins's petition for divorce is granted, and he is legally established as having no paternity rights or responsibilities regarding the child in question. The gavel struck with finality. Andrew felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he stood. Across the room, he saw Lacey crumple in her chair, Shirley rushing to comfort her. But this time, he felt no urge to help, no pull of shared history. She had made her choices. Now she would live with them outside the courthouse. Autumn sunlight painted the steps golden. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. It's over, man. You won. Not about winning, Andrew said quietly. It's about justice. About truth. James approached with some final papers to sign. The divorce will be processed quickly given the circumstances. You can start fresh, Andrew. And he did. In the months that followed, Andrew threw himself into his work. The promotion he'd been working toward came through senior investment manager at Mitchell and Associates. He sold the house, unable to live with the memories it held, and moved to a modern apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and no trace of his past life. Tom and other friends kept him busy with golf games and evenings out. Slowly, he began to rebuild. The betrayal would always be part of his story, but it wouldn't define his future. One evening, about 6 months after the court case, Andrew stood at his apartment window, watching the city lights twinkle below. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I heard about your promotion. I'm sorry for everything. I know it's too late, but I truly am sorry. The baby's doing well. Sometimes he smiles, just like you would have. I still wish things had been different. L. Andrew looked at the message for a long moment. The old him might have felt a twinge of sympathy, might have wondered about forgiveness. But that man was gone, burned away by betrayal and lies. He deleted the message without responding. His phone buzzed again. Tom, this time. Hey, remember the client dinner tomorrow? Sarah from accounting asked if you were coming. Andrew smiled slightly. He'd noticed Sarah's glances lately, her subtle flirtation during meetings. Maybe someday he'd be ready to trust again. But not yet, and not without careful consideration. He learned his lesson about trust the hard way. The city stretched out before him, full of new possibilities. He was stronger now, wiser, and free from the weight of betrayal. Some would call him harsh for refusing to forgive, but he knew the truth. Some actions didn't deserve forgiveness, and some people didn't deserve second chances. A plane drifted across the night sky, its lights blinking steadily. Andrew watched it disappear into the distance, thinking about journeys and destinations. His journey had taken an unexpected turn, but he'd emerged stronger, more determined, and absolutely certain of one thing. He would never allow himself to be deceived again. His new life awaited, built on truth and strength rather than lies and manipulation. The past was behind him, and the future lay ahead, unencumbered by betrayal or doubt.